Well, hello, folks. I'm L.A. Little, and this is your daily NeoTA wrap. Where we take a look at these markets, and we do it from a neoclassical perspective, each time asking ourselves what happened today, and what does it tell us about the coming ones. I do this show 4 times a week, Monday through Thursday, broadcast at or before 10 o'clock Eastern Time, archived on YouTube. You can catch it there. It's under the channel L.A. Little. Register. Anytime content's pushed, you'll be notified. Makes it nice and easy to stay up with us. As far as these markets, let's take a look at them and see what we got. If we look at the ending quotes, we actually had some weakness today that was primarily centered in the NASDAQ, in particular the NDX. That weakness really kept the NDX red all day long. After the bell, Microsoft comes out, drops another 4%. That put a little pressure on the futures after hours, but from what I can see here, they're slightly down, but not that much. The standout today, the Russell. The Russell had a nice big day up, 1%. Russell we'll talk about here in a second. But elsewhere, pretty flat here. Composite did extend, which is nice, despite the weakness in the NDX. And you had some more extension back up here on the S&P. Elsewhere, gold hammered for about 1%, silver down 2%, nat gas down 2%. We had oil making new lows today. The dollar is down slightly, but still held pretty well. And that pretty much is the story. Let's take a look here at the indexes. Let's start with the S&P. Now remember, the S&P is trying to get over the swing point high. That's really kind of the key test this week. And if you think about what's happening this week, it's a big week. You got the Fed on Wednesday. That's the highlight on the economic front. But you have some data out of China tomorrow, or maybe it's tonight on the industrial numbers. You've got PMIs at the end of the week as the new month gets started. There's some decent data coming out that could move this market, but it's really about the Fed. Is the Fed going to tell us that they're maybe not going to raise those rates when we think they are? And we're going to put it off a little bit longer, just like England has surprised in its minutes, showing us that, in fact, they're not as aggressive. They keep downgrading their economy and saying, well, we can't raise rates now. I don't think anybody can raise rates with the way it looks, but that's the key test. Does a push down, can't hold it, sellers disappear, flips back up, comes back to the top side. I expect it's going to try to break that swing point high tomorrow or maybe on Wednesday on that Fed meeting. If we look at the other indexes, the NASDAQ we just talked about, that one extends farther up. Swing point highs up here at the highs. It's trying to push up to them. The NDX did not do quite as well today, came down. That swing point high it broke, 42.53.97, gets to 42.54.47. Sellers kind of dry up, don't do the test, still hanging above that high. The standout today really was the Russell, as we said when we started here. That Russell closes at 12.74, high previous 12.52. That's a break of the swing point. Russell gets over it, more confirmation that this market's going to try to head higher. So we've got a confirmation here now on the Russell that it wants to try to go up and hit these highs. We've already got that confirmation on the NASDAQ, on the NDX. We're waiting on the S&P 500 now. So 3 of the 4 have gotten over those swing points and those highs. If we look at the sectors, and that, folks, as we talk about this, if you look over at the world markets, they're all at highs. Europe across the board, Asia pretty much there, the Hang Seng, the Shanghai, all of them pushing highs, trying to get over the highs. Moving back to the U.S. markets, IBB, which is the biotechs, these guys sky up, another new high tonight. This is a good measure of risk. They're going up, showing its new highs off and on. Does another ABCD structure to the upside, and it's not quite done. I suspect this thing's going to try to push a little bit more before it pulls back. We even had home construction push up today. That thing's been getting hammered. It's doing kind of a dead cat bounce off of, I think it was Pulte's earnings tonight, and or this morning actually, and gets a little bounce. But if we look elsewhere, you know, Intel was down pretty big today, but the SOX hangs. If you look at Intel, I think Intel lost about 1%, maybe 1.5% today. And I'm not sure what the story is here, but their earnings weren't that great, 1.76%. Intel still testing this big bar up. It's pushed up in, you know, to this higher range, keeps hanging there. But you know, Intel probably is going to have a hard time breaking higher at this point, given its earnings. One big standout today on the sectors, biotech, of course, we talked about, but the XLE. If you look at the XLE, what did this do? Made a new high. But if you look at oil itself, oil made lower lows. And if you look at some of the other sectors, the energy sectors, OIH pushes back up, closes higher. The XOP also does the same. So what we're seeing is divergence. So what do you think when you see divergence after a big sell-off? You're probably putting in some sort of a bottom. I wouldn't be surprised to see oil get a good spike in here somewhere pretty soon. If I look elsewhere, not much more to talk about here. The standout on the weakness today was the XLK, couldn't get going. And really, you've got Apple tomorrow. Let's take a look at that chart again. So Apple goes up, tests this swing point high, 113.25, closes at 113.10, so it's under it, does 55 and hit 53. So pushes with more volume. I suspect Apple's going to go back up and push again tomorrow, and then we're going to get earnings after the bell. Now Apple's coming into this huge bar, but the way this is set up, it looks to me like Apple's actually going to press higher on earnings and come back up here to test that breakdown bar, the highs of the breakdown bar. That's up around 119. I wouldn't be surprised to see Apple spike that before this is all over. Microsoft we talked about, got hammered on earnings after the bell. Let me see where it closed after the bell here. And what do we got on Microsoft? Big caps, Microsoft closes at 45 after the bell. 45 puts it down here testing these lows on this time frame. Let me see it on the weekly. So 45, so that weekly has 214 on it. The big spike up is at 46. So, you know, this is kind of critical for Microsoft to hold this. If it holds it, you know, it's really pretty good news actually. If it holds it and volumes are tame, because on the weekly that's where you would expect the support. If it gets under it, you know, this whole area down here, it can come back to it. And so you really, you know, if you're long Microsoft or want to be long Microsoft, you'd really like to see it hold this area, the 45 area. If it gives it up on this bar and it does it with volume this week, then you got to think all the way back to test these swing point highs again. Okay, that's Microsoft. So Microsoft's going to be pulling again, tugging to the downside. We just looked at Apple. Apple looked pretty good for a potential run higher. Now Google is a little bit different story. Google has struggled ever since the last earnings, and then Google has struggled on earnings for about 3-4 quarters now. That low is 541. It made it to 545, so it poked in there, had no volume. Look at the volume difference here versus what it was trying to come back into, right? So it can't get over it. So really, Google is probably going to hang here. If Apple gets a good day, maybe Google pulls up a little bit. Google has earnings on Thursday. That's going to be the real test here. And if Google delivers, right, I would think Google can trade right back up to 590 plus pretty easy. If it doesn't, Google is actually going to have a tough time. Let me pull it back to a monthly, and because there was a huge bar up, and that's this bar. That could take it all the way back to about 440. Yeah, about 460 down to 421. So Google has a huge range here. So far, Google is holding these lows and holding that spike down, right? I mean, this bar, the top's around 520, and Google keeps holding that area on the monthlies. So, you know, big numbers coming out of Google, because if Google can hold this area, right, then what has it done? It's simply consolidated up here for what? This bar up was here. That's about a year and a half now going sideways, basically. And, you know, once it breaks that range, it's going to get a big move one way or the other. And you want to see it, if you're long, you want to see it break to the top side. And so far, it hasn't failed to the downside. So that's Google. If I look at the ox markets, not really all that much to talk about. I mean, the dollar's still hanging at the highs. Here's the buck. So we're still hanging at the highs here, not giving it up at all. We just talked about oil making a new low. If we go look at the bonds, and oil, you know, does look like it's playing out down here, folks, but that's a hard buy until you get some sort of reversal. Bonds hanging at the highs, so they're not giving anything up. I said silver was down a couple percent, so it comes down after a big run. That's just doing a pullback after a big run. You know, these things, once they make their spikes, what you'd like to see is it to come back in and do a retest regen off the high. If you look at this, you've really got 1, 2, and I'm on a daily, 3, 4, 5. If it holds one more day, then that would be plus 6 bars, right, on this move before it comes back to do the retest regen. That jacks up the possibilities or the probabilities of this actually regenerating higher from about 62 to 80 plus. So you really want to see one more bar before it does that test. Let's see what gold looks like, because gold's doing the same thing. So the breakout here, and gold's already got 6 bars. So I think gold's already telling you what the story is. And the story is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, the story is as this comes back, it's probably going to be a buy. So if you haven't traded the gold and you want to trade the gold, this retrace is where you want to trade it. Looking at the continuous commodity index makes new lows. And then, of course, if we go over and look at some of these currencies, the euro spikes or tries to spike up, but then it reverses. Look at the volume on the prior bar. Look at it go into that gap. Doesn't have the volume. Reverses. This is going to test that low again. And let's look at the yen. That's the other dead cat. And that one's trying to actually turn and come back down. This one's just range trading. You know, these, you know, unless the Fed comes out and says, hey, we're not going to raise rates when you think we are. We're going to raise them even later probably. If you see that happen, then you're going to see these guys spike, and you're going to see the dollar spike down the other way. But that's all dependent on what comes out Wednesday. And it's hard to believe that the Fed's going to change. There's no conference call, so the Fed has to change the language to indicate that. And I think that's going to be hard to do, but you know, maybe they will. I don't know, but that's really going to be a tough call to see the Fed change that language. Earnings mostly sold. Economic news not that great. What's keeping us up? It's the euro, folks. It's the ECB. It's QE. It's QE infinity this time in Europe, and that really is the story. Nothing much more told to us today other than the Russell telling us that indeed this market is going to try to work higher. And, you know, if that's the story, that's the story. That's what it looks like to me. There was a question. Let me pop over and let's take a look at that guy. And if you want to ask questions, it's pretty easy. You just pop over here to NeoTA TV. Pop in here and right in this area, interaction with me. It tells you how to get a hold of me, how to send emails to me, or text if you prefer that methodology. Let's look at this. Let's look at this chart. So, question is about SNE, which is of course Sony Corporation, And the question actually was asked Friday. I missed the email. Yeah, it was asked Friday for Sunday night's program. I missed the email and apologize personally, but apologizing here again today. The question had to do with this breakout. So let me get up the weekly chart here as well. And so let me see. I have a position in this, held it for the intermediate term. On Friday, it broke out over the daily and the weekly. So that was the breakout on Friday, and on the weekly you also got the breakout. So he was looking at this and saying, hey, we got a breakout here, right, over this swing point high, and on the daily you got a breakout, and you can see it there with the red arrow going over that swing point high. So what is that? That's multiple swing point breaks on multiple time frames. That's a good thing. You like that. And he even says it. Hey, nice job. So the stock might extend for a few more bars. Usually 2 to 3 bars on the highest time frame. You got a weekly break. That means you're probably going to get 2 to 3 bars on this time frame. So that's important to, to denote that that's probably what's going to try to happen. Now, 2 to 3 bars doesn't mean, I always try to clarify this because a lot of times folks are thinking something different, right? Because it's easy to mistake what I say, if I don't add enough context. 2 to 3 bars here could be that way, or it could be just sideways. It's just probably not going to come down, right? So 2 to 3 bars extension to me is, ideally, and most of the time it is the extension to the top side, but it could be, kind of up and back stuff. Now, if it does this, of course, it's telling you it's weaker. But if it does do this extension up here, and since you broke on multiple time frames, not just one, that says that, it probably is going to extend, and that's exactly what it did. So, furthermore, it appears to have completed an ABC up on the daily, but on the other hand, some more to go on the weekly. Definitely got a lot to go on the weekly. On the daily, well, on the daily, it had finished an ABCD up, but these are kind of hard to I mean, you got a little small one, right? I mean, there wasn't much here, so it had already completed it. But when you're looking at these things and you see a break like this taking place, you really want to focus on the longer term, which is what you're doing, right? You want to look at this one and you want to focus on that, and that's got a long way to go still. So that part of it, I would focus on, the longer term takes precedence over the shorter term in terms of the general direction, in terms of the extensions and so forth. So it's nice to have them both line up, and and probably what you're going to see is you're going to see this thing at some point come back, set up an ABCD structure, right, to move back up inside that weekly that you just saw. And then, so the question, I finally get to the question here. I am concerned about a pullback. How likely does it seem to you I'll see some sort of support on the 2150, about 5% down? Would I sell some now? No, I wouldn't. And of course, it's a day later now, so I mean, it's easier for me to make the call now. But if you get multiple swing point breaks on multiple time frames, you typically do not want to sell. You want to try to let extend that 2 to 3 bars at least on this time frame, knowing that that weekly, you're not probably going to get a big pullback even if you get one, because the weekly is probably going to go, at least go sideways more so than down, right? The odds are fairly high that it's going to extend higher. And I'm seeing some daily support, 2150. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to worry about that piece of the question now because you got the extension. What you want to worry about now on the way back is this. This is your retest regen. You want to see it hold that area. And that's your buy on the way back now, especially with the breakout over multiple time frames. So, yeah, and the question, and then the last comment was it's been up 6 days in a row, and actually it was up 5, it looks like. Today it was 6. The ideal here is you have a winning position. You want to just let this thing go up. If it gives you a reversal sign, then you take a little bit off trying to buy it back here now. So in other words, you got this extension up tonight. You know, if you get a little bit more of an extension, and then maybe it comes back and then goes back up and fails, that's where you try to take it off and then buy it back cheaper. And that's the way you try to play these kinds of moves. Okay, folks, that's going to wrap it up for tonight. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. It's going to be a slow day because of the snowstorm up in New York. But Apple earnings after the bell. This market's hanging and waiting, and Apple looks as if it's going to try to give them a run for their money. Thanks for joining me. You tell a friend, tell two. I'm LA. This is, and it was, your daily NeoTA wrap. Have a great night, and I'll see you next time.